Hi, welcome back. It's been a while. My goal is to make you a Dickie Dare fan before this episode ends. But first, we have to address the elephant in the room, and by elephant, I mean Terry and the Pirates. Because let's face it, Dickie Dare is a Terry and the Pirates clone, only it's not. Terry and the Pirates is the Dickie Dare clone. But to appreciate what that means, we have to talk a little bit about Terry and the Pirates first. There are people alive today who don't know what Terry and the Pirates is, but in its day, it was a hugely successful comic strip. During the peak of the strip's popularity, from 1934 to 1946, it was read by 31 million newspaper subscribers. It crossed over into other media, a 1940 movie serial by Columbia, a television series, and a radio show. During those peak years, Terry was written and drawn by its creator, Milton Caniff, widely regarded as one of the most influential comic strip creators ever. At the beginning of the strip, Terry was a boy somewhere between the ages of 8 and 12. By amazing coincidence, this was the same demographic that many editors and publishers thought was the main readers of comic strips, though I don't know that any study was actually done to prove this or whether it was just anecdotal evidence. Terry traveled Asia, mostly China or the Orient as people called it at the time, along with Pat Ryan, his older best friend and father figure, having dangerous adventures together. We first met Dickie Dare in the comic books back in July 1936 in Famous Funnies number 25. According to the notes on that issue at the comics.org website, this is from October 1934 and is compiling the daily strips in the middle of the Dickie Dare and the Pirate Sub storyline. I don't know why the comic books started reprinting so often in the middle of stories, but they just did. At this point, Dickie Dare had been in newspapers for over a year, and this is 2 months before the last strips are published by its creator. That creator, Milt Caniff, Milt Caniff had come up with this winning formula of a boy and his father figure having adventures around the world together, and he had created it for Associated Press. But the editor for the Chicago Tribune, New York News Syndicate, liked Dickie Dare and asked Milt to create something just like it, but set in the Orient, and hired him away from the Associated Press. In fact, Milt was already publishing the first installments of Terry and the Pirates in October 1934, while AP still had 2 months of finished strips left to print of Dickie Dare by the same creator. It's funny that Milt, in fact, chose to have Dickie going up against pirates in this first and last outing that he would write. The stakes are high in the pirate sub story. Their first target was an ocean liner carrying $8 million in gold to the U.S. from Europe. As the governments bordering the Atlantic react, we even see a cameo of President Roosevelt. These are the sort of stakes that seem like they would have real consequences that we'll see a lot of in the superhero genre. You might think an adolescent boy might not be the best hero for an action-adventure strip, but Dickie acquits himself very well in this storyline, spreading rumors and turning the crew against each other. He is doing this, putting himself at risk, with almost no backup because his adult friend Dynamite Dan Flynn spends most of the storyline locked up in the brig. And let's talk about Dan Flynn for a second. He's a world-traveling freelance writer, think a cleaned-up version of Ernest Hemingway. And let's also mention Wags, Dickie's pet dog. Pet sidekicks go way back in comic strips to Buster Brown and Tige. Visually, Wag's closest precedent might be Snowy, or Milieu in the original French, the sidekick of that famous Belgian reporter, Tintin. Tintin started in Belgian newspapers as far back as 1929, but Tintin would not be printed in the US until the 1950s. So, coincidence? Or did someone bring a copy of Tintin back to the US for Milt to see from Europe, where by 1934 it was already immensely popular in several countries? While Snowy was the co-star of Tintin strip, though, Wags is usually relegated to a background detail. The great comic book artists, when interviewed later, will often cite the great comic strip artists, the artists as their inspirations, like Alex Raymond, Hal Foster, and Milt Caniff. But Caniff was also a writer's writer. He knew how to ratchet up dramatic tension like we had never seen in comic strips before. At the first climax of the pirate sub-adventure, Dan has been shot and is unconscious. The submarine is submerging beneath their feet. Dickie is out of ideas and cries out, not as the hero he's acted like, but as the child he's always been. When readers read that strip on the day it first appeared, they went to bed that night thinking about Dickie Dare and how could he possibly survive this. Anyways, spoilers, they do all survive. But other comic strip writers definitely read Dickie Dare. Chester Gould surely read this because Dick Tracy would soon go from mild suspense like, oh no, they're shooting at Dick Tracy, to Tracy is tied up and helpless. How can he possibly survive this death trap? Writers over the years will try to emulate this moment in comic strip history. This ultimate suspense that Milt Caniff has captured. And I think when we eventually get to the Silver Age of comics, you're going to be seeing this a lot more from Marvel. Now, before the storyline is even over, Milt Caniff's strips have run out and the story is wrapped up by Colton Waugh. It's a mystery to me how Colton Waugh was ever chosen to take over this strip. He had no previous comic strip experience. He was a 38-year-old map maker and painter from Massachusetts. But somehow Colton knew the right people and could do a passable imitation of Caniff's art, which was likely the most important thing. During an interlude between adventures, we meet Mr. and Mrs. Dare, a couple who live somewhere in suburban New York. When Dan says he wants to take Dickie on another dangerous adventure with him, this time to Tahiti, they just go, sure, have a good time. The Tahiti adventure starts as a pearl diving mission, but complicated by the presence there of a villain with international reach known as the Black Panther. Yes, the very first Black Panther in comic books was a villain from Fiji. Like Dickie Dare's first adventure, this one is nautically themed. The boys are aboard a schooner with their new friend Cranky Joe, so named because he's a cameraman and he cranks his camera, and the Black Panther is following them aboard a catamaran. Panther and catamaran? Stretching out the story is a storm and the rescue of movie actress Lily Lavelle, who was swept away from her film crew by the storm. They also pick up a pygmy helper named Walla Walla, who is actually a spy working for the Black Panther. The sea devil that guards the pearl bed is a giant octopus. Now, in comic strips and comic books, good guys often kill animals with a single knife thrust to get the story moving faster, but this is one tough octopus, and it takes 8 daily strips before a passing shark comes along and helps finish it off for them. Walla Walla, of course, betrays them, takes Dickie, Wags, and the Pearl, and is prepared to kill Dickie with a bow and arrow at point blank range. Now I'm conflicted on this moment. On one hand, Dickie's stoic response here shows character growth from his frightened state on the submerging submarine. But on the other hand, I find Dickie less believable and relatable now, and the cliffhanger less successful. Now I'm also conflicted about this. From our modern perspective, outside of Kristi Noem supporters, animal cruelty is just a big no-no. But I know this was more acceptable in the 1930s, both in fiction and real life, and Snowy was always getting hurt in Tintin, so there's precedent there. I'm also going to point out that first aid is amazingly effective in Dickie's world. All Dickie has to do is wrap his shirt around a spear wound, and Cranky Joe is practically good as new. The island adventure is short before they are back on water, with Black Panther stealing their schooner and Dickie and company stealing the catamaran. Lily becomes vital to the story only as a hostage for Black Panther. To keep Lily alive, all the guns are thrown overboard. Yay! So BP, let's call him that now, and Dan will have to duke it out the old-fashioned way. In a battle that rages up and down the schooner, BP and Dan fight until Dan finally knocks out the villain in the water. It was tempting at first to try to make a case for this Black Panther being one of the first supervillains in comic strips, but he's just not very super. Despite a good build-up, his spear throwing skills seem to be only so-so. He fails at several attempts to kill Dickie. Lily even gets the upper hand over him at one point. Still, cool name, right? The story gets anticlimactic for me after that, as BP had thrown the black pearl they were all fighting over into the ocean, and it got swallowed by a giant devil ray. So now Dickie and Dan go ray fishing, or is that raying, to get the pearl back. The death of the ray is rather violent and gruesome and unnecessary. Couldn't they just go diving again and try to catch some more pearls? They still have to get their prisoners to the authorities, and that means sailing to New Zealand, but along the way the wind dies for days and they nearly run out of food. The focus here turns to the relationship between Dickie and Lily, as Lily starts skipping her dinners to make sure Dickie gets enough food. Eventually the wind comes back, but the food is gone and they have nothing left but water. And then another storm comes. Here we are treated to almost a repeat of Caniff's greatest moment on Dickie Dare, when all his allies are defeated, this time by hunger and block and tackle, and Dickie reverts to the scared little boy again before realizing he has to act like a grown-up and fix this himself. To signal a passing naval destroyer that doesn't see him, Dickie lights the catamaran that they've been towing on fire, but the fire jumps to their schooner. Dickie finds himself trapped between the dynamite on their ship and a wall of fire. He jumps through the wall of fire into the ocean, and then... And that's as far as we get in 1937. There are more exciting adventures and even cooler villains ahead for Dickie Dare and Dan Flynn. So, how does Dickie Dare compare to Terry and the Pirates? I'm not going to commit to giving Terry and the Pirates equal coverage here, at least not today. So here's a quick study in contrast. Reading Dickie Dare, you're still going to see lots of racist depictions, like Walla Walla and the Black Panther. But you know these guys aren't coming back after this story. It's not like we'll have to deal with reading Connie on every page of Terry and the Pirates. Connie really did not hold up well. But odds are you aren't interested in Terry and the Pirates for culinary tips from Connie. You may be interested in Milt Caniff's well-deserved reputation for drawing very sexy women characters. His Dragon Lady set the standard for female fatales, or femme fatales, in comic strips, and Lily Lavelle, or any of Colton Waugh's more conservative female characters, aren't nearly as interesting to look at or read. So what do you think of Dickie Dare? Do let me know, and thank you for watching. Bye, see you next time. I know, I'm supposed to be talking about comic books, and I don't have much of a platform to be heard on, but this is a platform, so I just wanted to share with everyone that Donald Trump is a Nazi. And if you don't believe me, please do your own research and look up all the parallels between what he's doing and what the Nazis did. So please do not accept this as normal. Please resist in any way that you can, and let's all try to get through this together. Thank you.